Michael Altman. Welcome to the first episode of Supply Chain Visit for Pharma podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Evren. So thank you as always for the invite, and I'm honored to be your first guest speaker for what sure is to be a remarkable series of podcasts with leaders and supply chain wizard.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah, we were thinking about creating and launching a podcast for years, and then finally it's happening in 2023 in November, the week of the Thanksgiving. So thank you for making time in this short week. So for the first maybe a couple of topics in terms of what we are going to cover in this podcast. So this podcast, as we were thinking about like what to do in to be useful for pharma supply chain executives, we looked out there for episodes and podcasts of many different supply chain podcasts out there. And then there are quite a bit of pharma podcast as well. But there is not that many or, of substance, I should say, pharma and supply chain together, especially as it relates to like what is the pharma industry going as it relates to the supply chain management, digital transformation. So everybody's at it somehow in different maturity levels, but not much sharing happening. I mean, there are a few areas of like people, influencers, and podcasts, but our aim is to create a good source of content, bringing in the real leaders who have done this or are in the middle of doing it, and be useful to other leaders, right? When we look into the maturity curve of pharma supply chain and pharma digitalization, we see that we are one of the least digitized supply chains out there, only ahead of maybe the government, So there's a lot of examples from other industries, but I want to know, we want to highlight those stories, coming from pharma to inspire others, what I call make others be the wizard of change in the pharma industry. So with that, this is going to be more like a conversation. I want to, maybe get started by, introducing you to our audience. Michael, why don't you explain a little bit of your background, and then we can start with that.
Absolutely, Evren. So again, thanks for having me. So I'm the vice president of our self-care business at the newly formed Kenvue organization. Kenvue is the spin-off from Johnson& and Johnson of their consumer division. Self-care is one arm or one segment of the Kenvue portfolio, and it's pretty much everything you see in your medicine cabinet, right? It's Tylenol, Benadryl, Zyrtec, Pepcid, Imodium. I could go on and on, right? Sudafed, everything you kind of see or have tried and probably most likely continue to use, right? Our brands are synonymous with healthcare and with taking care of our patients and our consumers. I've been with the company almost 8 years, and prior to that, I have a total of 30 years experience in the industrial chemical, specialty chemical, branded pharma, generic pharma industries, having worked with now I guess 5 or 6 different companies. I have the privilege of working with them in various levels of the organization, but primarily in operations and supply chain for most of my career.
Yeah. So great, thank you. And when we were having you join us in the Digital Supply Chain Summit a few months ago in Rutgers Business School, we did a similar fireside chat on the stage. And not everyone has the opportunity, I said, to bring in their former boss for in front of everyone for grilling. Now it's me to ask questions. So yeah, Michael and I have that background that we work together, and I used to report to Michael in Sandoz, Novartis, in the supply chain organization. So those were fun years working together.
Great time.
So, like, if I split your experience into two, one is, of course, the pharma industry, and the other is supply chain. So, tell me what stands out for you when I say pharma industry, and from your experience in the pharma. How would you summarize and synthesize that experience that you had in the pharma as an industry?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? I mean, I spent better part of, I guess 15, 16 years of my career in the specialty and more the industrial chemical side, right? With great companies like FMC and Elementis Specialties. And, with those companies, margins are razor thin, right? Or certainly thinner than you see in pharma. I would say that they're much more cost conscious than your certainly your branded pharmas, right? And so what was interesting in moving over to pharma was bringing that level of experience around optimizing your supply chain, everything from customer service all the way back to the logistics, reverse logistics, planning, procurement, et cetera. Figuring out ways in which you can optimize it as best you can, recognizing that cost and service, right, are of paramount importance. And I'd say that's the difference that I saw way back when in my career. Now, with joining the likes of companies like Teva and Sandoz in the generic field, where margins are much thinner, you see that similar cost consciousness among those companies, and I think pharma is heading to that. It's not to say that they weren't cost conscious. It's just that of paramount importance was service and product availability. And I think the pharma company recognizes that there's a balance where you can serve both. And
Mhm.
I think that's what I have brought to the various branded companies I've worked for. And today, with Kenvue, which is primarily an OTC kind of company, at least on my side, there's definitely that balance between cost to serve as well as service, both of which are of paramount importance. And there's a balance to be struck, right? And I think over the last 3 or 4 years, especially during this challenging time of great change and disruption in our
Mhm.
marketplace, you see the need to alter that balance at different times depending on the supply chain and the situation.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, that's a great point about the margins. Like, it used to be in the branded pharma much higher, still is to an extent, but generic pharma is less than the branded pharma when it comes to margins. And when you move down the chain and go into contract pharma, which is like similar to those where you have been like very thin margins and service businesses, efficiency is key, which
Yep.
is maybe one reason why the industry as a whole is not moving forward as fast as we hoped in the world of digital age. Because some companies, some players are in the lower margin category, but having that skill definitely is an important one. Okay, so that's the pharma. When it comes to pharma, what about your supply chain experience? Like, when I say, summarize your supply chain experience, like, what do you see? What stands out?
Um, what's interesting is that I've been fortunate enough even early in my career to be in roles that are more end to end, right? I mean, when I first moved out of operations, not operations, but more process engineering and engineering, which is my background, into more your traditional supply chain. We didn't call it supply chain; it was materials management, right? And you truly had that end-to-end view with some of the earlier companies that I worked for, which was to me an advantage, right? You see the bigger picture. You see the forest through the trees. You have a understanding of how all the components work together, and I think that's a trait that most folks don't get a chance to see early in their career. And that has helped me throughout my career and the evolution in the companies that I work for is to be able to bring that truly strategic end-to-end perspective. You see traditionally now and in the past, right, the plan, source, make, deliver arms of supply chain, and folks work up the ladder in their career in those particular functions of supply chain. But the ability to both migrate across those and have an opportunity to be in a position like I am today, where you're truly running end to end and have an influence across all of those functions, making sure that they're optimized,
Mhm.
um, is what's great about the job and great about my career and great about opportunities in supply chain is that you see it end to end, right? You're not focused
Mm.
on one particular area. You get an opportunity to really dabble in what is a very broad-based career opportunity. And there's not many careers out there where you can do that.
Yeah. No, this is great. I mean, I love the word end to end, because when you
Yeah,
think about supply chain, you start from the supplier and then to the customer's customer. And in this case, we are talking about patients, right? That's a very important end customer.
absolutely.
And if you don't think about that, you only think about the customer that you're selling to, let's say maybe wholesalers or pharmacies, then you're missing an important element. So that end-to-endness, and it's not an easy thing to learn anyway, right? Like you need to spend really like your years in the different areas, like from upstream, let's say, to downstream logistics, to customer service, warehousing,
Absolutely.
demand planning. Not everyone can say they are the end-to-end expert in their like first 5 years in their career, right?
Exactly right, right? And folks shouldn't expect or aspire to that, right? It's just about making sure that whatever function you're in, you know and understand all the interacting and intertwined functions that impact the function that you're in. And once you start to understand that and get a better sense of the bigger picture, you can not only do your job more effectively, but you can also contribute to the company's success, more importantly, and it propels your career, right? I mean, people and companies are looking for individuals who can think and act, um, with the bigger picture and truly in our case, end to end, as we call it, right?
Mhm.
We use the term end to end a lot, right? But I think companies probably overuse that term too much, not really understanding that, to your point, right? It really starts with the patient and the consumer,
Mhm.
and then works all the way backwards.
Exactly. Well, which is what makes supply chain complex and fun at the same time, because you cannot control everything, even though we say we are end-to-end thinkers, but every different aspect of supply chain is a little different and sometimes hard to control, sometimes third party, which actually this discussion lends itself, your experience lends itself maybe perfectly to the topic of discussion today, which is managing supply chains in pharma during disruptions,
Wow.
which the last 3 years, as we all know, we don't remember much what happened from 2020 to 23. Like there's a little 3 year gap in everyone's memory, but there was something big happened that was like COVID-19. Like we are in 23 now, it's like 4 years in, and it impacted every aspect of our lives and things that we have never experienced before. But supply chain as a topic became a trending topic worldwide, right? We went on to the pharmacies, cannot find the drugs. I actually went to Macy's and I couldn't find shoes. Like they said, like we don't have sizes. It's on back order. You're gonna wait. So everything related to supply and product availability, to cost and prices, like it all got disrupted. So
Absolutely.
that's like I want to maybe talk about your experience maybe in the COVID times, and then we're gonna deep dive into the like specific cases of what you see was happening early days. Maybe give us some examples of some of the, maybe not just COVID, maybe start from 20, 30 years back. Any examples before COVID that stood out for you in terms of like managing supply chains and during disruptions?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, when you're in supply chain and you've been doing it for as long as we have, right? You're always going to see spot disruptions, right? A particular supplier can't get the raw materials they need to supply the product that you're buying from them, or making at your sites, right? You may have spot issues in delivery or in surges in customer demand that your capacities just cannot fulfill immediately, but yet you catch up fairly quickly, right? And you resolve through a variety of different means. And some cases, it's just brute force of just increasing capacity, increasing labor, et cetera, and getting it through. Um, but the last 3 years, right, to your point, we have seen unprecedented demand that has continued with us even today, and disruptions from all aspects of the supply chain, right? From global logistics to upstream worldwide labor constraints, to internal and external manufacturing constraints, both on capacity and labor, to disruptions far upstream than we can ever imagine. So case in point, right? All of our products typically come in a carton made of cardboard. Cardboard comes from trees, right? Which includes pulp manufacturing, right? So we've had challenges all the way back to the mills that make and process these trees to make the cardboard, the specialty cardboard that we use in our product to encase the product itself. And during the disruption, we were dealing with paper mills and upstream manufacturers. For example, aluminum. For every bottle that you receive of Tylenol, Zyrtec, Pepcid, whatever it might be, there's that protective foil that's a specialty foil specific to that product. And if you don't have aluminum to make that product, then you're out. And as you know, right, when you look at a particular product like Tylenol in a bottle in a carton, there's over 20 different components that make up that product, and any one is missing, you have a disruption.
Yeah.
Coupled with that was the demand disruption, right? So certainly during COVID, we've seen unprecedented need of our product, right? So when doctor provided a COVID shot, the first thing they said was take some Tylenol for any of the pain. Well, customers
Mhm.
listened to their doctors, and we saw huge spikes in Tylenol. We also saw huge spikes in products like Listerine, right? A study comes out that indicates Listerine has some effectiveness in terms of treating the symptoms of COVID, right? Although, maybe not fully proven or marketed, but those things alone would cause a spike in demand. People's world were completely disrupted, right? So customers and patients were looking at upping their regimen, right? So
Mhm.
and any little cough or sneeze or any kind of ailment they were treating. And so products like Imodium and Pepcid and Zyrtec and a lot of the common products you see on the shelf were impacted in terms of significant demand. So while we were fortunate to see that, it was a challenge to our supply chain to be able to meet that unprecedented need. And fortunately, the company made the investment, which we'll get into in a second, right? In terms of all the things we did to try and rise to the occasion.
Yeah, so you're almost explaining like a perfect storm,
Uh,
right? Like you cannot make this worse than this, right? Like you cannot make the demand side go crazy. You cannot make the supply side, the labor situation, the logistics, the inter-country shipments, everything is disrupted. And now yet you're in charge of like one of the biggest supply chains. And now like you're like looking at where how do I begin? So
Absolutely. And every little node right in that supply chain, every single, if even one of those is your constraint or your bottleneck, doesn't matter what you do in the rest of the supply chain, that it's that node that matters. So you have to look at the whole thing. You can't just look
yeah.
at individual pieces.
So, we'll go into that specific case, but before
Yeah.
that, like as a whole supply chain in pharma and managing disruptions context, so how prepared is pharma industry, you think, and not just your current company, but all the companies that you've been to? How do you think we are prepared for such supply chain disruptions, which typically we do after the fact, right? Oh, something happened, let's react. But what do you think?
I think it's mixed, right? So, for example, one of the companies I worked for, we worked on the avian flu pandemic. And the company stood up a very robust risk management plan, truly end to end, on how you would respond to such a pandemic. And as far as I know, they were actually using that same blueprint and model for the most recent pandemic. But I think when it comes to excess capacity, contingencies for the products that they make. Um, Dual sources, business continuity plans. I think companies all have those, right? And I
Mhm.
think especially in pharma where the products are so valuable to our patients and consumers that you need to do that. You need to have a robust, and we have an obligation, a social obligation to the world to stand those things up. Um, I think there's even more room for improvement to understand other vulnerabilities in our supply chain that we may not typically see, right? We're seeing it now in terms of IT systems, right? And standing
Mm,
up those.
yeah,
To your point around digital capabilities and gathering true data insights from our consumer and then translating that upstream as to how we respond. I think there's opportunity across not only pharma but other industries to be able to respond to that information more quickly, right? Through good information.
yeah.
So, long story short, to answer your question, I think it's mixed, right? I think it'll depend on the particular
Hmm.
pharma company and how robust that they have put into their risk management and continuity
Hmm.
planning. And look, we understand that we want to provide the most cost-effective product to our customer and our patient. Well, sometimes that means running our operations, capacity-wise and cost-wise, pretty thin. And that's what I talked about, the kind of the balance between cost and service, and
Hmm.
making sure that we understand how to migrate between the two, if there is a trade-off, and I stress the word if,
Yeah.
um, to make sure that during these kind of pandemics and disruptions that a company's prepared.
Yeah, great. So I think you have experienced this in the last 3+ years and to the level that has not been seen before. So let's dive into this, case study, the Tylenol supply chain that
Yeah,
we asked you to come over to our digital supply chain summit in the Rutgers Business School, both the fourth and the fifth
fun,
digital supply chain summit. And then,
great.
one thing that you showed, and I'm going to pull up one slide here that really is mind-boggling that please help us understand this slide, right? Like explain what went in here with Tylenol, and then we'll go into the specifics of the disruption.
Yeah, exactly right. We talked about this, two sessions ago, and then we talked about it even the last session a couple of months ago around what we saw in our business when the pandemic hit. And you see the data from 2020 where we saw a huge uptick, especially as the pandemic started in sales. Um, and then on a regular basis, right, we're seeing 2 to 3x times what we would call pre-pandemic kind of levels, which is just crazy and unheard of, right? And how do you respond to this, right? How do you sit there and stand up a supply chain with this kind of uncertainty? Was our biggest challenge back then, and it's been the case for the last 2 to 3 years. And in some of our products, we continue to see strong demand. That while the activities that we have done to increase capacity and stand up and meet this demand, we're still surprised. Well, not surprised, but pleased to see, this strong need for our products.
Yeah, I mean, when I first saw this, I said, "Oh my God!" Like, I mean, as a supply chain professional, I mean, you consider 30% demand increase as a surge. You consider 50%. Wow, this is gonna be a fantastic year, but we don't have the capacity. We don't have this inventory to supply. When you experience 12x spike and then a sustained 3x demand, like walk us through that like couple of months, like what started to fail first, where did you realize this, how did you start reacting, like fast forward that story for us in terms of like what's going on when you see this very first month.
Well, certainly, right. The company was, both pleased and surprised to see this kind of data and information, and uh, pleased in the sense again because of the reliance of patients to our product. Surprised, of course, to see these kind of levels and how do we support those, right? So,
Hmm.
you always have built into your supply chain some level of flexibility in order to rise to the occasion, right? Like you had mentioned, the 20-30%, which we typically had. Seeing numbers like this, right? And
Hmm.
basically that 12x spike depleted the inventory both of our customers, their channel inventory, as well as our inventory as well. So you're now basically starting from scratch, which could be, anywhere between 60, 90 to 120 days, depending on the product, in terms of, what I call channel inventory that's either owned by our customers or ourselves. So then it's about, okay, well, then how do you respond to just replenish that on top of what is now much, much higher demand than we ever expected? And so we did the typical thing around in terms of surging in terms of our labor, equipment capacity. We went back and enacted our risk management plans around engagement with suppliers and their suppliers to ensure that, one, that we got our fair share of allocated demand, and that we understood their capacities and their capabilities. That included activating or increasing our secondary and tertiary sources that we had qualified. In some cases, we still needed to qualify some additional ones, which was an activity that we did over the last several years. And then immediately started engaging with our customers, understanding, this spike, this increase in demand. What do we know about it? What are our
Hmm.
customers and our patients and consumers saying? How are they reacting? How does this translate upstream to what is needed? Where do we need to focus? The one thing we recognized is that for us, it was about patient access, right? It wasn't about the dollars associated with this increase in demand for our products. It was about, at this time, given COVID, given what families were going through, it was about patient access. So we looked at things and partnered with our customers. For example, we have several offerings of Tylenol solid dose, right? Different sizes, 2400 count, 225s. What we did was we intentionally deprioritized and in some cases discontinued the higher count bottle sizes in favor of the smaller count bottle sizes. This one gave more patient access to needed product immediately. Two, it started to help us standardize and upstream with our suppliers. Hey, focus on this bottle size, focus on this carton, focus on this label, focus on these products, as opposed to the whole portfolio in order to supply product. And we made it very clear to our suppliers, in partnership with our customers, that this was going to be our primary focus. We did the same thing with Listerine, as well as several other products that we saw similar spikes, maybe not as large, but spikes enough to tax our overall supply chain. And so we did that first and foremost, right? It was about engaging upstream and downstream, two, understanding the data, right, and the information, and then three, it was about optimizing and streamlining our entire end-to-end supply chain, with the intent of patient access and
Hmm.
shelf availability.
I mean, there's like these are strategic decisions. There's a lot of things coming at once, and then there's a lot of execution, which any one of these individual initiatives would be taken as like, oh, this is a year-long project, or this is a multiple-month initiative, like all coming at the same time. How did you handle it? Like, was it like overtime every day? Was it extra investments in people and outside, talent? How did you manage all that?
Yes to all those, but most importantly, right, is our company. We have an ongoing what we call rapid response team, right? And so, we have been good in the past to be able to mobilize short teams in sprints from an end to. So we're looking at all functions, right? So we put together all the necessary function involved: finance, customer service, marketing and sales, procurement, operations, um, deliver, right, and logistics, where we put all those folks together who are our A players who can get things done, and sprint to figure out what is our strategy, right? And each strategy varies depending on the supply chain. And so it's about mobilizing those teams, executing on that sprint, figuring out where is the weak point in our supply chain and responding. And then I think the other good news is that, the company invested heavily, right? And now we have been investing heavily, and we doubled down, especially during this period, about finding additional sources to make our product, to package our product, doubling down on qualifying additional suppliers who could help us with key components or ingredients. We modified our network to do more, what I'll call for the U.S. market, more onshoring, right, in terms of where do we source our product. We looked across every aspect of our supply chain to make sure that no stone was left unturned to see where there's opportunity to just fully optimize what we did. And the last thing is that, you know, while we utilize our data, we really accelerated the use and investment and analysis of the information that we had. What was the data telling us? And at what point, you know, do we have to respond based on the data that, you know, changed a certain percentage across all of our supply chain?
Mhm.
How do we mobilize and then respond to that change?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is obviously a lot of learning opportunities, lots of things happening all
Uh,
at once.
yeah,
And I'm sure, like, you know, one thing that came out of this, and telling this story or going into the details of this more and more, every time I'm getting excited, you know, and one of those discussions actually led to a collaboration and an article that is published on Harvard Business Review recently in October last month. So
yeah,
congratulations on that. I think at some point, one of the school should pick this up and make this a case study for business school or supply chain schools, because this is really, like, we have seen other case studies like Zara case studies or Walmart case studies and, you know, being taught in business schools, but
yeah.
this is truly a remarkable set of circumstances. And you need to consider every aspect of supply chain strategically, execution level, all suppliers, all materials, all components, all customers, all SKUs, everything together. This is, like, you know, this is a potential learning and case study opportunity, which is like a side note for academics out there teaching the business school students or supply chain graduate degrees. But for you, coming back from this, like, you know, 3 years forward now, a lot of new things are in place, right? You learned a lot more, both personally, you know, in your professional career and then as a company. But personally, like, what would you say your biggest learnings, you know, were?
Wow, it's a great question. And first back to the article. Thank you very much for mentioning it, right? And thank you for the collaboration between yourself and Adelaide and Annette Reich from our internal team, who did a phenomenal job at putting you know, the story to life. Just a great article summarizing 3 years of just a very unique experience, challenging experience in a way that a company can rise to the occasion. But to answer your question, right, personally, right, I think, look, I mean, you can't underestimate the value of people and the investment in people to get these things done. And don't get me wrong, the data and the information is key. It's not a trade-off. It has to happen, you know, interchangeably, where the data helps and supports your folks that are executing on the strategy to use that data to make good, quick decisions, right? And
Yeah.
so for me, there's no substitute to the people that were involved over these last 3 or 4 years and the remarkable way that they came together, collaborated, and worked tirelessly. Right? I mean, these are folks that they too had, you know, their families were impacted. You know, they too were caught up in this pandemic, where their lives were disrupted, and yet, you know, all the way from the operators to our planning folks to our marketing and sales to our finance to, you know, our communication, everybody was just operating on all cylinders to make sure that this was executed as flawlessly as possible. It's not to say that it went well 100% of the time, obviously not, but just a remarkable team. So for me personally, right, it's about the people and the emphasis of the development of those people and the recognition of the hard work that they go do.
Hmm. Great. I
Yeah,
mean, at the end of the day, you know, a supply chain is a people business, even though there's a lot of systems, there's a lot of processes,
yeah,
but there are thousands upon thousands of people executing, making decisions on an hourly, daily, weekly basis. and some strategic decisions like open up a new factory somewhere, or enable a new supplier, or expand the supplier business to do more. So a lot of these things all touch people. So very good learning. But what about the learning on the digital side of things? Like how critical was digital? How it is critical it is now to the organization's success? And what do you think is going to happen in the world of digital and pharma supply chain?
Wow. Three great questions. How important is it? I think it's critical, and I think we're learning that, we're constantly learning about that, right? The advancement of artificial intelligence and the advancement of digital and the visibility of data and information continue to advance faster than we can even use it. And the important thing is that you do use it, right? We have a lot of data, but in some cases, not a lot of insight. And so it's always the
Mhm.
translation of that data and information into insight and decision making, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's really key. And that's what it's not to say that we all didn't know it before. It's about, it's always, always a pandemic or some type of disruption that makes you realize it even more, the importance of those things. And I think that's what happened here, is that um, the company recognized the importance of not only the data we collect, but the way in which we present it, the way we use it to make decisions. And that's going to continue to evolve. Are we there 100%? Absolutely not. But we and other companies are recognizing the value of that, and they're leaning in, they're investing in it. I think it will continue. Um, we see it today in all sorts of industries, but in the pharma industry, we probably have more of a ways to go.
Hmm.
But I don't think it's a lack of understanding the importance. It's just that it's a difference from where we started from relative to other industries. But knowing pharma and the way that they have advanced medicines and came
Hmm.
up with novel solutions, I think the pharma companies will be, and I know it, they'll be fastly adopting this and catching up real quick.
Okay, well, I fully 100% share the same sentiments here. Like we are behind, we have been behind, but this COVID almost propelled us to a faster pace, in a faster lane, catching up to some other industries. But when you look into the end-to-end supply chain, coming to that like maturity of like digital, right?
Yeah.
Your downstream, patients, consumer, pharmacies, retails, and the availability of data on the downstream
Yep.
versus upstream manufacturers, suppliers. Where do you think the maturity was better? Where do you think it was like a black box? We didn't know much, and how do you recommend industry take steps towards, you know,
Yeah.
investing? Because there's investments everywhere, right? From in the end to end. Where do you think the biggest gaps of visibility have been, and what is going to happen in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, based on my experience, where I see is that our customers have a ton of data about patients and consumers and point of sale information and trends and things like that. For us as a manufacturer, we have a ton of information about our internal operations and how we make product and how we distribute product. Ton of information there. I think one, it's the connectivity, right, of the information of how does a change in this information translate as to how we need to respond upstream. Um, so I think that's one aspect that needs to be better connected and worked on. And then I think it's about even further upstream from our manufacturing and our external partners is how do we get more understanding and collaboration around their operations so that as signals upstream, and I mean from like our raw material suppliers, our external partners that are supplying products, finished goods or intermediates or whatever it might be, more information and visibility upstream so that we can understand what disruptions there may have ramifications downstream, right? So it's a pocket thing and a connectivity thing in my view, and those are some of the learnings that we went through over the last several years. Um, but it's an area that we can definitely improve upon.
Yeah. So is it fair to say that on the downstream side, there's more consolidation? There are fewer players like the big retailers and big pharmacies that we sell to, and they have more established systems. We just need to use it better. But on the upstream side, when it comes to suppliers, there's probably more fragmentation and less maturity in terms of data availability and visibility.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. I mean, in general, right? General comments, right? It comes in pockets, right? We have some great partners where the data is there, it's available. Now it's about collaborating and making a connection. And then we have some partners that are still learning and maturing.
Mhm.
They're still great partners, they're still great suppliers, but the data and the visibility and the risk management planning and continuity planning could be matured a lot more. Yeah,
Mhm. Mhm.
agreed.
Yeah, I mean, my personal experience have been in pharma, like as a consultant and technology, designer, let's say, for the last 10 plus years, having seen or worked with over 1,000 suppliers, contract manufacturers, the fragmentation is much larger. Maturity is like, different levels, and there's a big change of like acquisitions, mergers, strategic change. So the upstream, in my opinion, is a little bit behind on the digital maturity, but then big brand owners like Kenvue, J&J, others are all interested in getting more visibility into upstream, and not just the immediate finished good supplier, but maybe the raw material supplier as well, right? Having building that visibility, and then what you said, connectivity to your systems, because it's no longer that we can say, my end-to-end supply chain is where my company starts and ends.
That's
It's
right.
actually the full supply chain that you're being subject to, and your performance depends on their performance, your partner's performance. And in this day and age, getting that data, getting that visibility is
Exactly.
key in managing the disruption, or just the day-to-day business as well. Like, how do we make better decisions every day, not necessarily just because of disruption?
Yeah, exactly. And I think you said it. I think you said something that resonates with me, right? Is you got to think about it as all one supply chain, right? Is that how do you, while there are different companies and different players involved, how do you get everybody on a collaborative basis where it's all one supply chain, right? And how do we look at it that way? I think is key.
Yeah. Excellent. So, looking forward, then, like, do you think most of the industry have learned from this experience the last 3 plus years? Are we better prepared now? Or what else we should still, or the executives in pharma should still pay attention to as they're building their like supply chain capabilities from the learnings of your experience?
Look, I think each company has learned based on their experiences, and I think we'd be foolish to think that companies in this today's environment that are sustaining themselves through this period, they all learned, right, and they all advanced and they all improved. Um, you'd be amazed at the things that we experienced in terms of disruption over the last 3 years. So you would think, what else could go wrong, right? But inevitably there is something else that could go wrong that you hadn't planned for or prepared for. Um, so I think it's always a journey, right? It's not a destination. Is that you're always learning about the risk in your particular business, the risk associated with each one of your supply chains, and how do you better prepare yourself. That's what companies need to do. And that's going to be the competitive advantage, right? There's always going to be disruptions. They may not be as large as the disruptions we saw over the last 3 years, but there's always going to be disruptions. And the companies that are prepared for that and have good risk management plans in place, good continuity plans in place, have invested in the what I call the insurance policy, and as we mentioned in our article, those are the companies that are going to succeed, right? Those are the companies that are going to win not only in terms of being a good company, a profitable company, but they're going to win in terms of
Yeah.
supplying product to our consumers and our patients, which is equally if not more important.
Yeah, great. That insurance analogy really resonates
Yeah,
well with many people. All of us have insurance. We're paying healthcare insurance. Some of
exactly.
paying life insurance just in case. right?
Right.
I think the topic of like going from just in time to just in case supply chain, right?
Yeah,
Like
that's great. I like the way you
you
think.
know,
Yeah.
I in my grad school at Georgia Tech, we visited the BMW plant, and they were not just doing just in time, but they were doing just in sequence manufacturing. Literally, the suppliers were delivering like parts 4 hours, 3 hours before it goes into the manufacturing line in a
Yeah.
sequence of the cars that they are building. So they don't even shuffle or store the inventory. They literally unload or load and put it directly into the line. So it's that optimized in terms of cost and timing. But now the pandemic has shown us that, just in case supply chain, because just in case this happens, where
Yeah.
is going to be the capacity? Do I have enough capacity here? Do I have an alternative supplier? Do I have enough inventory position, which all costs money? And you can think of this as an insurance policy, of course. So for the C-suite out there in pharma, whether it's contract manufacturing or branded or generic pharma, what type of insurance policies they should think about? Which one you think is more powerful in invest, or is it a combination? How should they think about investing into this insurance policy to better manage disruptions?
I think as I mentioned, right, it truly is supply chain by supply chain, and it's really about understanding your supply chain. It's about investing in where you believe are critical inflection points, right, in terms of their ability to supply and surge and be agile. You have to look at the entire supply chain, not just one node of the supply chain, and you have to look beyond your four walls, right? So as we talked about, it's about not only your raw material supplier, but their supplier, right? And understanding do they have the proper contingency? And then downstream, it's about having great relationships with your customers to derive those insights, but also understand what they can do to help address surges in their supply chain and better give us visibility and direction as to what customers and patients want, so that we can tailor, our supply chains accordingly to best serve, right? So
Mhm.
I think it's about the investment in both the people. It's an investment in the capacity, in the surge capacity, and I think it's the investment in the strategic element of risk planning and business continuity planning, and recognize that when you're thinking about your investments that you're going to make, um, deciding not to invest in risk management will may not hurt you in the short term, but it will definitely impact you in the long term.
I guess that was a perfect closure to the key messages to the pharma industry. Obviously, there's many things we can continue talking about experiences and specific cases, but yeah, you said something that is great. Like it's not a one size fits all. Like any supply chain, it's unique to your supply chain. Understanding your supply chain is key, but not just like a limited view of like your supply chain, meaning your suppliers and customers. It's like extended supply chain, doing risk assessment in every node, figuring out where your weak spots is, and then investing in strengthening those,
Absolutely.
whether it is with
Yep.
people or extra capacity or strategic agreements or some digital capabilities to get the insights, and most importantly, the being agile, right, to respond to those things quicker. So if you're super agile and if you can do things in one day, you may not need that much capacity, but there are cases that it will take you months to build that. So you rather implement and invest now because it will be too late. Your competitors may capture the market, and disruption can be, and as I learned, maybe we learned together in our generic pharma experience, could actually be a competitive advantage. Like for some companies who are better prepared in the generic world, for example, they can go ahead and capture the full market share. And then while the other companies are failing to supply and paying failure to supply penalties, you are making more volumes in terms of demand fulfillment and getting ahead. So very, very interesting topic in how we manage. Obviously, not something that we are going to solve the entire world's problems of disruptions in 1 hour session, but this was a very fun session. Thank you very much, Michael, for your time and all the insights and experiences that you shared.
Evren, thanks for having me. It's great to be your first guest and host in what's going to be a great series of podcasts. Would love to do this again. You let me know anytime. But good luck in this and all your endeavors, as I expected when we work together. only great things for yourself and Supply Chain Wizard.
Thank you very much. Well, we'll continue to serve many companies, from I say to my team now, from California to Japan. I'm actually flying to Japan this Friday for an important customer meeting. As I see different aspects, meet with different people, different clients, different cases, I would love to host them here. As now we kicked off with you as this, podcast effort and initiative. So yeah, looking forward to bring that insights and expertise back and give it back to the industry. So thank you, Michael. Have a nice Thanksgiving week with your family, and talk to you again soon.
Same to you. Thanks again. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.